What will they think of me? The thought that keeps you weak, the invisible person. Listen, before you hear anything else, understand this. That sentence in your head is not harmless. What will they think of me? That sentence has cost you years. That sentence has stopped moves you were supposed to make. That sentence has killed versions of you that never even got a chance to breathe. You didn't fail because you weren't capable. You froze, and freezing looks clean from the outside. But inside, it's fear. You call it being careful. You call it timing. You call it waiting. But it's fear. Fear of being seen. Fear of being judged. Fear of being talked about. And the craziest part, the people you're scared of fare not. Building anything themselves that they're watching. And you handed them control. Right now, your life is being edited by people who won't pay the price for it. Think about that. Your decisions are filtered through opinions that don't carry your consequences. That's weakness. Not because you're incapable, but because you're allowing external noisito dominate internal direction. Let me tell you the truth most people avoid. You're not afraid of failure. You're afraid of exposure, that you're afraid of trying hard in. Still not being respected, that you're afraid of being laughed at before being taken seriously, that you're afraid of looking stupid during the learning phase. So instead, you stay small. You stay quiet. You stay reasonable. And reasonableness has ruined more lives than failure ever could. Because failure teaches, judgment paralyzes. Every time you think, what will they think of me? You step back in a line. You shrink. You soften your ambition. You dilute your standards. You delay your moves. Not because you don't want it, but because you don't want attention until the results are guaranteed. That mindset guarantees one thing. You will never be dangerous. Because nothing powerful starts polished. Everything elite looks embarrassing before it looks impressive. But you don't want the awkward phase. You want respect without discomfort, status without struggle, results without being talked about. That's not how the world works. The world only respects outcomes. But outcomes demand a phase where you look foolish, and most people never cross that phase. Why? Because they live in their head, and their head is crowded with voices, parents, friends, classmates, coworkers, strangers, imaginary critics that don't even know you. Exist. You wake up and think about them. You plan around them. You censor yourself for them. And none of them will save you from regret. That's the trap. You are sacrificing your future self to protect your current image. And image is fragile. Image changes with rooms. Image changes with trends. Image changes with opinions. Identity doesn't. Strong people build identity. Weak people protect image. Right now, you're protecting an image that isn't even respected. Let that sit. The people you're afraid often admire your caution. They don't reward your silence. They don't care. They notice you only when you rise. And when you rise, they talk anyway. What exactly are you protecting? Approval. From people who disappear the moment you need help. Validation. From people who won't remember what you didn't do. You're paying a heavy price for a cheap reward. And the payment is daily. Every day you hesitate. Every day you overthink. Every day you wait for permission. That's the tax of fear. And fear doesn't announce itself. Loudly, it whispers. Be realistic. Don't rush. Now is not the right time. People will judge. That whisper has ended more potential than loud failure ever has. Because at least failure moves. Fear keeps you still. Look at your life right now. Be honest. How many things have you delayed because you didn't want to explain yourself? How many times did you lower your ambition because you didn't want questions? How many moves did you hide because you weren't sure they would work? That's not strategy, that's submission. Submission to opinions. And here's the brutal truth that if you don't decide who you are, the crowd will decide for you. And the crowd always chooses average because average feels safe. Average doesn't threaten anyone. Average doesn't create discomfort. Average doesn't invite criticism. But average also doesn't create respect. People don't remember average. They scroll past it. They forget it. And deep down, you know that's why you're frustrated. Not because you lack motivation, but because your inner standard is higher than your outer behavior. That gap creates pain. And instead of closing the gap with action, you numb it with excuses. You tell yourself you'll move when you're ready. But readiness is a lie. Ready is a feeling. Action is a decision. And decisions don't need confidence. They need courage. Courage to be misunderstood. Courage to be judged early. Courage to be laughed at before being respected. If you're waiting for a moment where nobody doubts you, that moment never comes. They doubted you when you were quiet. They'll doubt you when you moved. Stop negotiating with ghosts. Because most of the judgment you fear will never even happen. And the judgment that does happen, it fades. People talk for minutes. You live with the result for years. That's the exchange. Right now, your fear is loud because your direction is unclear. When direction becomes solid, noise loses power. But direction only becomes solid when you move, not when you think. Thinking creates fear. Movement creates clarity. That's why weak people overthink and strong people execute. Not because strong people don't feel fear, but because they don't obey it. They understand something you haven't locked in yet. Judgment is temporary. Regret is permanent. And the longer you delay, the heavier regret becomes. This is not about confidence. This is about loyalty. Who are you loyal to? The version of you that wants comfort now, or the version of you that demands respect later? Because you can't serve both. Point one requires silence. The other requires action. Point one wants approval. The other wants outcomes. And you already know which one leads to A. Smaller life. Here's the identity shift you need to hear early. You are not here to be liked. You are not here to be understood. You are here to execute. And execution offends weak minds. That IT exposes laziness. That IT highlights excuses. That IT threatens comfort. That's why people judge. Not because you're wrong, but because your movement forces them to see their own stagnation. And instead of admitting that, they project. They mock. They minimize. They doubt. That's not your problem. That's confirmation. Judgment is not a stop sign. It's a signal that IT means you've stepped out of line. IT means you're no longer blending in. And blending in is where ambition dies. If you feel that fear right now, good. That means you're standing at the edge. Most people never get there. They stay in the crowd forever and call it normal. That you're not normal. And part one ends here for a reason. Because before discipline, before obsession, before dominance, you must kill this thought. What will they think of me? Because the moment you stop asking that, your life accelerates. Not slowly. Violently. End of part one. Repeatable line. If they control your thoughts, they control your life. Part two. You are not afraid. You are saying, let's go deeper. Because fear didn't start with you. You were trained into it. From the beginning, you were taught to behave. To fit. In. Wait your turn. Raise your hand. Stay in line. And most importantly, to care what people think. Approval became safety. Silence became intelligence. Standing out became risk. You learned early. Don't be too loud. Don't be too different. Don't be too ambitious. Don't embarrass yourself. And that training worked. IT made you manageable, but it also made you weak. Not weak in ability, weak in decision-making. Because now, every move you consider passes through a filter that doesn't belong to you. You don't ask, is this right for my future? You ask, how will this look? That question is poison, because it shifts your focus from results to reactions. And reactions don't build lives. They destroy them. Let's say it clearly. You're not afraid of people. You are afraid of losing social safety. You are afraid of being talked about and not having control over the narrative. You want respect before results, but respect doesn't come first. Pressure does. Isolation does. Embarrassment does. Every person who ever separated themselves was misunderstood first. There's no exception yet. You keep hoping you'll be different, that somehow you'll rise quietly without disrupting comfort, that you'll upgrade your life without upgrading your tolerance for discomfort. That's a fantasy, and fantasies keep people broke. That here's the truth nobody says out loud. Most people around you need you to stay the same, not because they hate you, but because your growth forces comparison, and comparison exposes excuses. When you stay small, they feel safe. When you move boldly, they feel threatened. They judge not to stop you, but to calm themselves. And you mistake that judgment for authority. You start obeying people who are emotionally reacting, not strategically thinking. That's backwards. You don't need approval from people who haven't built anything. You don't need understanding from people who avoid discomfort. You don't need validation from people who quit quietly. Yet that's who you're listening to every time you hesitate. You're letting unqualified voices vote on your future. Think about how insane that is. People who won't wake up early are influencing your discipline. People who avoid risk are shaping your ambition. People who settled are advising you on growth, and you call that being smart. That's not intelligence, that's fear disguised as logic. Let's expose the real problem. You don't trust yourself yet, and because you don't trust yourself, you outsource confidence. You look to reactions to decide if a move is valid. You wait for signs. You wait for support. You wait for reassurance. That waiting is costing you momentum. Momentum doesn't come from certainty. Certainty comes from momentum. Action first. Confidence later, but you reverse the order. And now you're stuck in analysis. Endless thinking. Endless planning. Endless mental rehearsal. No execution. Because execution creates exposure. And exposure threatens image. You stay hidden. Let me be blunt. Hiding is not humility. Hiding is fear. You tell yourself you're being low-key, but low-key is just fear wearing a calm mask. You say, I'm moving in silence. But silence without movement is just stagnation. Real silence is loud work. Silent grinders don't fear judgment. They ignore it. They don't ask for permission. They don't announce plans. They don't explain delays. They move, and movement changes everything. Here's what fear won't tell you. People respect consistency, not confidence. They respect results, not explanations. They respect discipline, not potential. But you're chasing respect through perception. You want people to see you as certain, way, strong, capable, smart. But the irony is this. The more you try to manage perception, the weaker you look. Because people can sense hesitation. They can feel when someone's eyes try not to offend. They can tell when someone's eyes playing it safe. And safe people don't inspire respect. They blend into the background. Invisible, that's the cost of caring too much. You become forgettable. Not hated. Not attacked. Just irrelevant. And that scares you more than criticism. You sit in the middle. Not fully committed, not fully comfortable. Half dreaming. Half hiding. That middle space is where ambition dies slowly. In explosion. In collapse. Just decay. Day after day. Until one day you wake up older, tired, frustrated, and you realize you were never stopped. You stopped yourself because of imaginary reactions from people who moved on anyway. Here's another truth. People are thinking about themselves, not you. They judge quickly. They forget faster. You replay moments they already forgot. You obsess over impressions they don't even remember. And you're sacrificing years for opinions that last seconds. That's the trade you're making. And it's a bad deal. Let me challenge you. What if they think you're crazy? So what? What if they doubt you? Good. What if they talk? They always do. Silence doesn't stop judgment. It invites it. People judge inactivity just as much as action. Least action builds something. And here's the final hit. You don't overcome fear of judgment by thinking differently. You overcome it by acting while it's present. Fear doesn't leave first. You move first, that's the rule. Confidence is a byproduct. Courage is a decision. And decisions don't require consensus. They require standards that the question now isn't, what will they think of me? The real question is, what will I think of myself if I don't move? Because that voice doesn't fade, it gets louder. And one day it will be the only voice left. That's the danger. This part ends with a line you need to repeat until it becomes instinct. Into part 2, repeatable line. Their opinions are loud only when my direction is weak. Part 3. The lonely phase is the proof. This is where most people fall off. Not because it's hard, but because it's quiet. No applause, no encouragement, no validation. Just distance. This is the phase nobody posts about. The phase nobody prepares you for. When you stop explaining yourself, you don't just lose opinions. You lose people. The calls slow down. The messages stop. The invites disappear. And for the first time, you're alone with your decision. This is where weak minds panic. They start questioning everything. Was I wrong? Did I change too much? Why does nobody support me? And instead of understanding the process, they run back to familiarity. They soften. They apologize. They explain. They re-enter the cage because loneliness scared them. But listen carefully. Loneliness is not a punishment. It's confirmation that it means you stepped off the common path. Crowds don't walk alone. Leaders do. When you stop caring what they think, you stop performing. And when you stop performing, the audience leaves. That's normal. You weren't valued for who you were. You were tolerated for who you pretended to be. Once the mask drops, so do the spectators. This is the tax of self-respect, and it's expensive because now there's no distraction external noise to hide behind. Just you, your habits, your discipline, your excuses. This is the moment you realize how much of your identity was built on reactions, likes, approval, attention. Without it, you feel empty, not because you're weak, but because you were addicted to being seen. Now you're invisible, and invisibility hurts at first because you confuse it with irrelevance, but they're not the same. Invisibility is temporary. Irrelevance is permanent. Invisibility is the workshop. Irrelevance is the grave. This quiet phase is where foundations are built. No distractions noise opinions. Just work, and work doesn't care about feelings. Work doesn't clap. Work doesn't encourage. Work doesn't wait. IT demands consistency, and consistency exposes character. This is where discipline replaces motivation, because motivation needs witnesses. Discipline doesn't. Discipline shows up even when nobody knows, especially when nobody knows. That's why most people fail here. They confuse loneliness with failure. They think, if this was right, it would feel better. No, if it was average, it would feel better. If it was safe, it would feel better. Growth feels isolating before it feels empowering, because you're shedding old versions faster than new ones are formed. You are in between identities, and that in-between space is uncomfortable. You don't belong to the crowd anymore, but you haven't earned separation. You float, and floating tests patience. This is where obsession begins or the dream dies, because obsession doesn't need company. Obsessed people don't need reassurance. They need progress. They don't explain absences. They don't announce intentions. They disappear to build. And when they reappear, they don't introduce themselves. Their results do. But before that moment, there is silence. And silence makes people uncomfortable. That's why they avoid it. They keep noise around them to avoid facing themselves. Music, scrolling, talking, complaining, anything to avoid stillness. Because stillness exposes truth, And the truth during this phase is brutal that you're not. There yet that you're not special yet that you're not respected yet. And nobody owes you belief. That's humbling. But humility is dangerous when paired with discipline. Because now you're not pretending that you're training. And training doesn't look impressive, that IT looks boring, repetitive, unglamorous. Same routines, same grind, same sacrifice. Day after day, and no story, and no drama. Just execution. This is the phase where your ego starves. And ego starvation is necessary. Because ego wants recognition before readiness. Discipline wants readiness before recognition. And the one you feed will decide your future. Let me tell you something real. People don't abandon you because you changed. They fall behind. And instead of admitting that, they label you different. Different schedule, different priorities, different standards. Different is lonely, but different is powerful. Because average people need companido justify comfort. You know that you're building something that doesn't need approval. And yes, some nights will be heavy. Some mornings will feel pointless that you'll wonder if anyone notices that that's the test. Can you stay disciplined without being seen? Can you keep going without feedback? Can you trust the process without external proof? Because if you can, you're dangerous. Dangerous people don't need crowds. They create impact, and impact attracts attention later. But attention earned too early kills momentum. That's why silence is protection, not weakness. Silence keeps your energy intact. Silence keeps your focus sharp. Silence keeps you from negotiating your standards. Explaining drains power. Execution builds it. That's why winners move in silence. Not to look mysterious, but to stay uncontaminated. Opinions contaminate focus. Too much talk invites doubt. Too much exposure invites interference. Silence lets you compound. And compounding requires time. Time away from noise. Time away from opinions. Time away from the need to be understood. Because you don't need to be understood, you need to be consistent. Understanding comes later. Respect comes later. Results come later, but only if you survive this phase. Most don't. They mistake loneliness for a sign to stop. You must see it as a sign to lock in. Because the moment you get comfortable being alone, you become unstoppable. You no longer need permission. You no longer need validation. You no longer need an audience. You move because it's who you are. And when that identity locks in, judgment loses all power. Because you didn't build this for them. You built it for you. This part ends here. The next part gets colder. Because now we talk about cutting emotional ties completely, cutting the invisible swords. This is where it gets colder. Because now it's not just about ignoring opinions, that it's about detaching from people emotionally. And that's where most people fail. They think stopping explanations is enough, that it's not. You can stop talking and still be controlled. Because control doesn't come from words, that it comes from attachment. You still care who understands you. You still hope certain people approve. You still want validation from familiar faces. That means the cord is still connected. And as long as it's connected, your movement is limited. Let's say it clean. You cannot build an elite life while emotionally depending on average people. Not because they're bad, but because their standards are lower. And standards shape behavior. That if you stay emotionally tied to people who prioritize comfort, you will always feel guilty for choosing pressure, that you'll feel selfish for grinding, that you'll feel cold for saying no, that you'll feel wrong for changing. That guilt is manipulation, not intentional, but powerful, because it pulls you back into familiar patterns. This is why people relapse into old versions of themselves. They don't miss the habits, they miss the belonging. And belonging is dangerous when it costs growth. You must understand this phase. This is not about hating people, that it's about not needing them. Needing creates leverage. Leverage creates influence. Influence creates hesitation. Elite minds remove leverage. They don't argue. They don't justify. They don't seek closure. They detach silently. emotionally, decisively. And this is uncomfortable because it feels unnatural. Humans are wired to connect, but elites are wired to build. First, connection comes later. Most people reverse that order and never escape the crowd. Here's the truth you've been avoiding. Some people benefit from you staying small. Not consciously, but emotionally. Your ambition threatens the balance of the group. But discipline highlights laziness. Your focus exposes distractions that they pull. Not aggressively, subtly, through jokes, through doubt, through concern. Don't burn out. Why so serious? Life isn't that deep. Those statements sound harmless. They're not if they're anchors. They keep you at their level without open conflict. And if you're emotionally attached, you listen, you soften, you slow down, you start explaining yourself to avoid tension. That's how potential leaks out, point one compromise at a time. Elite separation requires something brutal. You must become okay with being misunderstood indefinitely. That no correction, that no defense, that no clarification. Let them believe whatever makes them comfortable. Your job is not to manage narratives. Your job is to execute. That here's the mindset shift. You don't owe access to everyone who knew you. You don't owe explanations to people who aren't building with you. You don't owe comfort to people who avoid discomfort. That's not arrogance, that's boundaries. And boundaries feel offensive to people who benefited from your lack of them. Yes, some relationships will change. Some will fade. Some will turn cold. Some will turn strange. That's the cost of elevation. You cannot rise and keep the same. Emotional gravity. Gravity pulls down. You must lighten your emotional load. That includes expectations. You expect people to understand you. They won't. You expect people to support you. They can't, because they haven't chosen your path, and that's okay. But if you keep waiting for alignment, you'll delay execution forever. This phase requires emotional independence. You move without consensus. You decide without reassurance. You endure without applause. That's strength, not loud strength, quiet strength, the kind that doesn't explain why it's doing what it's doing, it just does it. And let me warn you, this detachment will feel lonely in a different way, not empty, heavy, because now you see clearly. You see how conditional support was. You see how fragile encouragement was. You see how much noise influenced you. That awareness hurts. But awareness is power, because now you're no longer emotionally predictable. You don't react to opinions. You don't respond to doubt. You don't chase validation. You conserve energy. Energy is currency, and elites don't spend it people who don't invest back. You will notice something strange here. The more detached you become, the calmer you get. Less explaining, less proving, less emotional spikes. Just focus. Focus is intimidating because focus doesn't ask for approval. That IT moves forward while others are still debating. That's why people label it cold. But cold is misunderstood discipline. That you're not cold, that you're clear. And clarity makes people uncomfortable when they're confused. They push back. They test you. They provoke reactions. If the old you is still there, don't fail that test. Silence is your answer. Consistency is your response. Result of your explanation. You don't need to announce change. Change announces itself. And when it does, the same people who doubted will rewrite history. They'll say they always knew. Let them know you're not building memory with them, you're building momentum. This is where your emotional center moves inward. You no longer need Pleto feel stable. You become your own anchor. Your standards become law. Your routine becomes identity. The discipline becomes self-respect, and self-respect doesn't be e.g. that IT doesn't chase, that IT doesn't explain, that IT executes. This is the phase where fear of judgment collapses. Not because judgment stops, but because it loses relevance that you're no longer living for. Reactions that you're living for alignment. And alignment feels ruthless though, people living in chaos, that's fine. This part ends with a line that must harden in an instinct. Part 5. Kill the need to be is the final layer. And it's the one almost nobody is willing to peel back. Because now we're not talking about fear, we're talking about addiction. You need to be like this, not a personality trait, that it's a dependency. And dependencies make people controllable, that as long as you need approval. You are owned by moods, owned by reactions, owned by silence from others. Your emotional state rises and falls based on how you're perceived. That is not living. That is emotional slavery. Let's be clear. You don't need to be liquid to survive. You don't need to be understood to execute. You don't need agreement to move forward. Those are comforts, not requirements. And comfort is the enemy of every elite outcome. That here's the brutal truth. If everyone likes you, you are lie to someone, usually yourself, because truth creates friction, standards create tension, discipline creates distance. People don't dislike you because you're wrong. They dislike you because you stopped adjusting. You stopped laughing on cue. You stopped explaining delays. You stopped apologizing for ambition. And that threatens social order. Because social order is built-in mutual mediocrity. Don't outgrow us. Don't make us look lazy. Don't change the rules. But you didn't sign that contract that you're not here to be easy to digest, that you're here to be effective. And effectiveness is polarizing. Let me say something heavy. Being liked is for people who want company. Being respected is for people who want control. You cannot have both at high levels. Respect comes from consistency. Consistency comes from discipline. Discipline comes from saying no to distractions, to comfort, to unnecessary conversations. And every no offend someone that's the price. So if you're still trying to keep everyone comfortable, you're not serious. Serious people accept the cost early so they don't pay it forever. You've been negotiating your ambition to keep relationships smooth. That's backwards. Smooth relationships with no progress lead to resentment. You smile on the outside and rot on the inside. That quiet resentment turns into regret. And regret is heavier in temporary disapproval. Here's the shift. You must become okay with being the villain in someone else's story. Not because you did something wrong, but because you refuse to stay small. Every person who grows is labeled selfish by someone who didn't. That label means nothing, that it's just resistance. And resistance confirms direction. Now listen closely. This is where identity hardens. You stop asking, do they like me? You start asking, did I respect my standard today? That's the only metric. Not feelings, not reactions, not feedback, standards. Did you do the work? Did you stay disciplined? Did you avoid comfort? Did you execute without applause? If yes, you won. Even if nobody noticed, especially if nobody noticed, because unnoticed discipline creates undeniable results. And results change everything. Results rewrite narratives. Results silence doubt. Results remove the need to explain. But before results arrive, you must survive unpopularity. That's the test. Most people quit. Here, they say, I'm changing too much. No, you're finally becoming consistent. They say, I don't feel like myself. Correct. Your old self was built around approval. That version must die. Not slowly, decisively. Because you can't build a ruthless future with a soft identity. You must choose to be warm and accepted, or focused and progressing, be relatable, or be respected, be comfortable now, or be proud later. There is no hybrid version. Anyone selling balance is already settled. Elite paths are narrow. They require sacrifice, repetition, and emotional control. You stop reacting. You stop explaining. You stop defending. You let people believe whatever helps them sleep. Your sleep comes from progress, and progress doesn't need witnesses. Here's what happens next if you don't quit. Something dangerous. You stop caring. Not in an emotional way, in a strategic way. Opinions stop entering your nervous system. Judgment stops spiking your emotions. Silence stops feeling awkward. You become still, and stillness is power because now nothing pulls you off course. Not praise, not criticism, not attention, not rejection. You move regardless. That's freedom, not freedom of time, freedom of mind. And freedom of mind creates dominance. This is the final warning that if you keep one foot in people's opinions, they will pull you back every time you try to run. You must cut the need to be liked at the root. No dramatic announcements, no confrontations. Just quiet withdrawal from emotional dependency. You don't owe access. You don't owe explanations. You owe executionto, the future version of you who is watching right now. And that version will either thank you or despise you based on what you do next. This part ends here. The final part will lock identity permanently. End of part 5. Repeatable line. I don't need to be liked. I need to be disciplined. Part 6. They don't control you. Is where it ends. Not with motivation. Not with emotion. With final authority. Because at some point, fear stops being something you fight. It becomes something you've outgrown. And that point comes when you realize this. They never had power. You gave it to them. Their looks didn't stop you. Their opinions didn't block you. Their words didn't control you. Your reaction did. That's the shift. When you understand that, something inside you shuts off permanently. You stop reacting. Not because you're numb, but because you're decided. Decided people are dangerous because they don't need agreement. They don't need encouragement. They don't need permission. They move, and movement rewrites identity. Let me be clear. You are not here to win arguments. You are not here to convince doubters. You are not here to correct misunderstandings. That's weak behavior. Strong people don't explain direction. They enforce it with consistency that you've spent too long trying to be understood by. People who never intended to understand you, that's wasted energy. Understanding comes after results, never before. Once you accept that, you stop bleeding effort into conversations that produce nothing. You go quiet, not insecure quiet. Focus quiet, the kind of quiet that scares people, because silence backed by discipline feels unpredictable. People don't know how to deal with someone who doesn't react. No defense, no justification, no emotional response. Just progress. That's when power shifts. Because now, judgment has nowhere to land. IT needs reaction to survive. You starve it. You don't correct rumors. You don't clarify intentions. You don't explain delays. You let time handle it. Time is undefeated. And time always exposes who is serious. Here's the truth that locks everything. Most people never judge you because they hate you. They judge you because your discipline reminds them of their own inconsistency. Your focus threatens their comfort. Your silence disrupts their noise. Your progress highlights their excuses. They label crazy, arrogant, obsessed, cold, good. Those labels mean you're no longer relatable. And relatable people don't change outcomes. Relatable people blend in. You didn't come here to blend. You came here to separate. And separation is lonely at first. But loneliness is temporary. Regret is permanent. Now, let's finish this properly. There will be moments when old thoughts try to return. What will they think now? What if I lose them? What if I'm wrong? That's normal. But those thoughts don't get votes anymore. They can speak, they just don't decide. You decide, based on standards, not emotions, not moods, not reactions. Standards don't care if you're tired. Standards don't care if you feel misunderstood. Standards don't care if nobody claps. They demand execution, every day. And execution builds a reputation you never have to talk about. That's the goal. A life that speaks without explanation. A presence that doesn't need validation. A mindset that doesn't bend under observation. That's dominance. Quiet dominance that hears what happens next, whether you like it or not. If you stay disciplined, people will start watching differently. Less comments, more silence. That's respect forming. They won't say it. They'll feel it. And eventually, some will try to reconnect. To align. To dissociate it. To benefit. That's when you'll understand why you had to detach earlier. Because access is earned, not remembered. You don't reopen doors just because someone knocks late. You keep moving. Forward. Always forward. This is the final identity. You are not here to be liked. You are not here to be understood. You are not here to fit in. You are here to execute at a level that makes opinions irrelevant. And once opinions become irrelevant, fear disappears. Not slowly. Instantly. Because fear needs importance. And you've stripped importance away from everyone except the mission. That's the end of the internal war. In more explaining it. In more proving it. In more shrinking. To standards, just discipline, just work, day after day, whether anyone is watching or not. Especially when no one is watching. This is who you are now. And this identity doesn't negotiate. IT doesn't ask. IT doesn't wait. IT moves and lets the world adjust. Part 7. Read this before you care, before you go back to your life, before you open another app, before you hear another opinion. Stop. Because this is the moment most people betray themselves again. They felt strong for a few minutes, clear, locked in. Then they walk back into the world and shrink. Because the world is loud, and weak people let noise decide. This is where you separate for real. Understand this clearly. The thought, what will they think of me, never disappears forever. IT waits for moments when you're tired. When results are slow, when you feel alone, when nobody is clapping, that's when it tries to take control again. And if you haven't hardened your identity, it will win. Not by force. By comfort. IT will tell you to explain yourself. To soften your tone. To slow down. To blend in again. That's the trap. Because the moment you start explaining, you've already lost ground. Explaining means you're seeking permission. Explaining means you're negotiating standards. Explaining means you've put their comfort above your future, and the world rewards none of that. Let me tell you something brutal. Nobody is coming to save you from being average. Nobody is coming to defend your potential. Nobody is coming to protect your discipline. If you don't guard it, it gets stolen. Stolen by distractions. Stolen by opinions. Stolen by comfort disguised as advice. That's why obsession is required. Not motivation. Not inspiration. Obsession. Obsession is what keeps you moving when nobody believes yet. Obsession is what keeps you disciplined when progress is invisible. Obsession is what makes you dangerous in silence. People will never understand obsession until results force them to. And by then, their understanding doesn't matter. This is the line you must cross. You stop a skingif. You're doing too much. You start a skink if you're doing enough. You stop checking reactions. You check standards. You stop managing impressions. You manage execution. Because at the end of this road, there are only two outcomes. Point 1. You lived carefully, protected your image, and stayed acceptable. Or 2. You lived aggressively,